The dusty walnut air of home filled my lungs. The windows shone brightly. When I rolled onto my side, I felt dry blood against my skin. I was naked. Interesting. Last thing I remembered was being very worried that I was going to die. I looked around my penthouse. All seemed to be in order. Then I looked at myself. All limbs and expected protrusions accounted for, although some damage was clear. I didn't suppose I'd made it back to my bed on my own, while dead. I think I had accidentally given my captors the chance to drag me away from the dangerously close to reality frontier. There was no actual evidence of this straight away, no note, no romantic frisbee gestures. It was just that anything else seemed harder to believe. Fortunately, I had left plenty of spare gear behind when I fled, including the sniper rifle and the Night Fairy's own assault rifle, kindly not reclaimed. I dressed and armed up, feeling quite healthy, and went to look around my floor. The other apartments were all in use. Killed some of them out of routine, then stumbled home none the wiser to what I was going to do with myself. I had died, hadn't I? I didn't really know, having been dead at the time of the alleged murder. All I could say was that I felt great, and perhaps better than before, although maybe being able to change my clothes was all the explanation that needed. I took stock in the apartment and came to 3 important conclusions. 1. I was immortal, or thereabouts. My clock informed me that it was still the same day I had died. I regenerated very quickly, with minimal wounds, and I'm almost certain that bear tore me apart. 2. The fairies didn't have the courtesy to bring my equipment back with my quasi-corpse. All my good weapons, military armor, most of the bullets and antibiotics, it was either confiscated or still in Harbour Town somewhere. Same for my book on making magic fertilizer, which I still wanted to try out. I resolved quickly that I was going to return to the scene of the crime, if only to force the powers that be to show their heads again, or if only to be marginally, theoretically less alone. Conclusion 3. It was certainly all the fairies' doing, as in the hallways outside I found an arrow painted on the wall. It led me around a corner to a couch leant up against the plaster. I puzzled out that something was behind it. The wall was broken open, and through the gap was the elevator shaft, now provisioned with a long rope and metal ladders roughly bolted all the way down. The varmint had a secret route to my bedroom all along. Who knows what other efforts they'd made to conduct their work in and around this comfy tower. No wonder they wanted me back. Sorry, but thanks for the heads up. It really does make things a little better between us. If they explained a few things, I really might have stayed. Alas, I was still being left to make my own fun, so I left the tower with a light bag that night, loaded with 2 days' supplies. In the dark, I made a brisk jog to Harbour Town, and no, being so recently dead hadn't diminished my strength at all. Quite the opposite, in fact, which was just what my minders were hoping for, I suspect. When the bacteria remade you, it remade you good. Just one obvious worry. Why did everyone else get remade into a monster, and me into what felt just like a bigger, better idiot running through the desert in the moonlight, keeping balance with a sniper rifle? Perhaps I was just a zombie at heart. Perhaps I was the chosen one. No reason why I can't be both, really. Stopped off at a house in the middle of nowhere after about 9 hours of continuous travel, hardly ever dropping to a walking pace. Finally that had worn me out. I'd just come back from the dead and casually run a few marathons. Okay. Diomedian bacteria, not all that bad, if you ignore literally everything else it had done. Killed the house out and grabbed a good 8 hours in their boiling hot bedroom, interrupted only by a man who woke up in the closet and tried to eat me. He ate a blast from the sniper rifle at point-blank range, and I was fortunate enough that the gore splattered mostly inside the closet, allowing me to close the door and go back to bed for a while before the smell really started doing its thing. I set off north again in the afternoon, at a slower pace this time, and by dinner I was walking some familiar streets. blown up town. Looked like I had enjoyed my stay in their prison so much that I went back there for the night. It was a mist night after all. Settled in early to polish off my supplies and re-inspect my body. Little marks indicated where I had sustained mortal wounds. They'd been bigger when I was in the penthouse. Thought about shooting myself to see what would happen. Should have brought a graphic novel with me. I was clearly getting bored. Well, the night brought its usual excitements. That said, there was an unusual element to it, carrying on with the previous experience of the zombies growing more bold, brash and brutal. They were back at it around the prison, smashing everything they could, and this time the concrete really wasn't holding up. They were breaking off pieces of the outer walls, then pushing through. They had made all kinds of breaches in the cell blocks downstairs, then travelled up the guard tower I was sitting on the roof of. They bent the door out of shape and got onto the walkway directly below me, where their dangling flesh mops, that is arms, could just about latch onto the roof's edge. It was a much better show than before, and I was, on the one hand, very concerned that hiding up there wasn't going to save me, and on the other hand, a little chilled out by the self-made promise of immortality. Dying still hurt, though, and left me at the scant mercy of those who probably enjoyed seeing me dead now and again for science and all that. Ended up getting to work with the assault rifle, killing everything that looked spry enough to get up to me. Many of them didn't really try to climb, and instead went to town on the walls holding up the roof. Either clever or stupid, depending on how you look at it. I couldn't really see how they were doing, but the threat that the roof might actually collapse because of it was a daring spice to the broth of danger I was swirling in. Oh, and those birds were back. I had the sniper rifle, so I carefully shot them out of the sky. It seemed they had to slow down quite a lot to regurgitate their acid payload, making this easy. Took more than one bullet to bring them down, which hardly made sense given the bullets were as big as their heads. Everyone was getting a lot more immortal of late. Thanks to whoever invented concrete, the Romans was it, I didn't have to find out what would happen if the roof collapsed. Between about 4 and 4:30, dawn's light came and banished the mist, although I was still stuck with the zombies growling at my feet, so I had to give a final round of shooting to clear myself a way back down. Around 10 were right up in my face the moment I slipped from the roof. I fired off an entire magazine in the assault rifle, then flipped over the mag to stick in a second one taped to the side, fired off all that, emptied the chambers on my revolver, and threw in a few kicks for good measure. Quiet. They'd torn about half the concrete walls below me down, not enough for a collapse, but enough that I couldn't use that spot again. This was going to become a long-term problem, I sensed, as was the fact I'd used almost all my ammunition that night. There was a zombie bear pawing at the corpses that had fallen from the tower. Blasted it from the safety of the guard walk, a little score settling there. Then as I walked off eastward, I came across another one of the things. I think they might have been eating bits of dead zombie, hence my presence was triggering a boom for them. Never saw them eating a live one. Can we evolve the ability to eat live ones, please? Could use an army of bears. Actual army was apparently under orders to let me get torn apart now and again. Not this time though. I stood on a dumpster by the road and emptied another magazine, clearing the way to carry on. Was lighter going with all my bullets gone, so that was something. Within half an hour, I had found my bike on the edge of town. I took it back to the road, then pedalled off eastwards. In theory, I was on a road that went all the way to Harbour Town, but a short ways after the suburbs it entered another bombed out area. I was about to go back and find an easier way, but I could see orange flare smoke in the distance. I hadn't heard a plane, and entertained the possibility that it was something other than army business. I was still roosting on the idea of actually finding one of the survivors I'd been tracking to get to this hellhole end of the county. No, it was the army. One of their crates, with no parachute. It was amid so much rubble that it must have been placed by hand, and notably it was right where the old road would have run if it hadn't been churned up, melted and baked into the ground. In other words, it was where they expected me to go. It was like a trap, only rather nice, in that as well as a few bits of food and ammo, it came with another booklet for vectors. Yes, that was me, my job title perhaps. It was instructions for assembling a car from parts of all the destroyed vehicles around the place, along the way noting that the army had deliberately damaged most of them beyond repair, but not all. Loads still had gas in them, so that wasn't an issue, it claimed. This was a book from a while back, of course, so the survivor groups must have guzzled up a load of it since. Still, it would beat cycling. Only problem was that the book referred to many aspects of something it called my training. Ah yes, my training. I remember well when I was thoroughly prepared for the experiences ahead, equipped with plenty of supplies, and the skill base to disassemble and reassemble common vehicles with only scavenged tools. If that had been their approach before, why on earth had it been enough of a failure to fall back on guy who woke up in a coffin in a cheap suit as the next big hope for humanity? I turned right away to the back page. Just a little message this time from the ferry captain, claiming he was getting me a better place to stay. He also said it was absolutely great that I died, and he hoped it didn't feel too painful. Oh, you hoped that, did you? I'll share the experience with you sometime. This confirmed that I had actually died, in their professional opinion. It was also good, they claimed, that I was now alive. Yes, I thought so too. We'd be great friends if they weren't so giddy about my disembowelments. Well, thanks for the guide, fairies. I took it with me for a rainy day's reading, although I should note for context that in the 35 days I'd been in Arkansas, it hadn't rained once. Could be unusual weather for the season. Red mist that reanimates the dead seemed unusual too. I spent 3 hours cycling very carefully across the mountainous rubble. It would have been impossible without the serious torque my freshly restored legs were offering. I should have just picked the bike up over my head and lunged across the debris. After being spurred on by yet another bear picking through piles, I made it to some countryside. Then I turned north and travelled 1 more hour to the centre of Harpertown, enjoying its intact roads. I searched around for a while until I saw a building I recognised. Its particular pattern of collapse, slumped in on itself, was one of the last things I remembered in my past life. Shortly after, I was on the very spot of my death. Blood on the floor. It felt surreal to be there, and I suddenly began to wonder if I was actually a different person now. It didn't feel like that was my blood. Beside it, a plastic bag had been wrapped around what turned out to be my rucksack, all my clothes, and my various guns tied together with plastic tags. Neat work, fairies. You wouldn't believe who was also there. The bear roared and leapt down from the very building I'd come to see. I was still holding the handlebars of the bike and pushed myself onto it to coast out of the way of the attack. Immediately I was pedaling, speeding off down the smooth road. I looked over my shoulder. The bear had followed a short way, then stopped. I dragged the sniper rifle off my back, its strap burning the side of my neck as I did. Got my eye to the sight. The bear was staring at me, confused. Poor thing. It did have a bullet in its brain after all. I pulled the trigger, and this time the bear's head exploded apart. The body, after a tense moment, slumped to the ground. Revenge was had. Sorry, my furry friend, I'm just as immortal as you are. Its head would regrow, I expect, and surely in that case it would actually be a different creature, since the brain was brand new. It would be like an adult infant or something. Dumb and like a zombie, I guess. Yep, staring at the blown-up head of the only being I'd hugged in a while really made me think. And that thinking was itself the answer to some questions, I think. If I blew my brains out, I might actually die for real. A very interesting proposition to consider, and one I had to hope the army didn't decide to experiment with on their own terms. The whole thing came to an end. I took my stuff back to the scrapyard, my overall interest in exploring Harpertown thoroughly expended. Got back about 4, ate up, and finally got to relax. Had something of a wholesome time the next day. I'd been reunited with my gardening guide, and I fully intended to test it out. Scientists might have wanted me to test it out for all I knew, so everyone could enjoy the show. I took a pickaxe from the warehouse and went a short ways outside to a whitish rough rock. It somewhat resembled what I needed in the book, so I broke off a load of pieces to take home. That was the nitrates sorted. It asked for clay-rich soil, which there was loads of just below the warm, dusty surface of the fake desert. Tick that one off. Then the Diomedian flesh part. This was a little more tricky, because it did specify that the flesh shouldn't be taken from things that are alive. So was a zombie whose head I'd removed with a shotgun technically still alive? I ultimately decided to myself that it was, and instead got my flesh from another ready source, bits of partially decayed flesh lying around the place. These were the remains of the other members of the animal kingdom that the Diomedian bacteria had not reanimated, it seemed. Can't win them all. The flesh was surprisingly fresh seeming, which was evidence enough that the bacteria was present and at least trying. It must need certain conditions, or certain mutations, or certain weird mists to get its process to work fully. All that mattered to me was I could fill a bucket with locally sourced, partially zombified cow innards and bring them home. I was having a lovely time. The payoff came after a long afternoon of grinding stones and mixing the ingredients. I ended up with a box full of magic mud. Only thing that was missing was something to grow. For that I had my secret weapon. In a little can inside the warehouse was a single yellow seed, like a big piece of sweet corn. It was, as it happened, a corn seed. Or to put it another way, that's what sweet corn kinda was. I poked it down into the mud. The book had no advice on seeds or how to plant it, and I quickly found out why. You don't need any advice with magic mud like this. Within 10 minutes there was a green sprout poking up. It grew before my eyes, moving the soil, taking only another half hour to get a few inches high, at which point it produced long, up-angled leaves that curled down in a very Cornish fashion. I thought it was going to grow the whole thing, but after getting to about a foot with 10 or so leaves, it stopped its growth spurt, unchanged when I checked back a few hours later. This thing was right in the middle of the scrapyard, by the way, placed so that I could see it from the roof. I was working up there in between plant watching to compile a stretch of wooden furniture all along the roof, a barricade to stem the tide, for it was that time again already. Happily, things were not as wild as the previous battle. My wall of tables, trees, and trellis did a decent job keeping me alive, believe it or not. Because while it obviously could have been ripped down at a moment's notice, the zombies were convinced they could get around it instead. They wasted time looking up and down the roof for a way through. Could be that the obstacle's strange appearance confused the poor bacteria driving their brains. They were all new to the world of pattern recognition, and when they hesitated, they died, a bit more, for a while, and so on. Kept half an eye on the yard, hoping the invasion didn't knock over my corn planter. That would just be going too far. Fortunately, I smelled much better than the magic stork. No birds came that night, making things more chill. Although I did get a visit from a few of the green ones, looking really, really green in the dark, their skin pretty much glowing. They were on the move now too, bored of sunbathing on roofs all the time. Based on my own vague experience, it could be that their transformation into bullet-resistant mutants took a lot of time and energy. They'd got it now, and probably the stuff that was even worse would be next out of the Red Mist Salon, revitalized, refreshed, living their best deaths. Anyway, for now things were manageable if I paid the bullet toll. Lost hundreds more as I stood my ground on the roof's edge. Some zombies, the prepared ones, had ammunition on their persons here and there, yet the supply was dropping at a rate that would have me throwing stones within a week. Could try searching Harpertown for more, although two things were holding me back. First, the hope that the army would get the plane flying again, then just drop a crate of bullets at my doorstep as a kind gesture, and second, that I wanted to repair and expand my rooftop obstacle course, seeing as it worked pretty well. I really wanted to feel safe again, like it had been in the tower. That is to say, safe at first but rapidly less so. That was all I asked. Oh, and I wanted my corn to grow. It was still as small as before after the battle, and no different when I woke up in the afternoon. The guide said the bacteria works in phases, for its own safety, whatever that meant. I think I just needed to see that all this mayhem actually had some real-world application that wasn't entirely horrific. Not that all this was a worthy trade for a way to make a fast food version of corn on the cob whenever you had spare flesh to sacrifice to the bacteria. Yes, I think that old lady I shot back in Shrinetown was onto something there. She's probably up and about again now, paying the price for dabbling with magic compost in the run-up to the garden show. The army was doubtless waiting to see if my own dabbling had the same effect on me, which it wouldn't because I was the chosen one. Just what they wanted, or I hoped as much. You see, if I could give them what they wanted, they might let me leave, I thought. If I'd developed enough to survive death, wasn't that the success of their mad science proven? At the very least, it should be someone else's turn. Take my blood, take my fertilizing feces, and for the love of God, tell me what the hell's going on. Well, little did I dare hope, they were working on a special something for me.